Welcome back to the Cool Zone, where we discuss life and the fun part of the history books. I'm your host, Thomas. Today, I want to dig into a couple of different topics. I want to start with kind of the idea of solidarity and allyship. Then we can cover some corporatism, some slacktivism, and ways that you can be a better activist and things to look out for along the way. Um, I want to discuss progressivism and a few of my issues with that. And then I want to move on and let's discuss in a broader sense kind of what is leftism, right? What is socialism? What is communism on a bigger global scale? And how does it interact with other leftist ideologies or so called leftist ideologies? Let's start at the top with solidarity and allyship, right? These are two words that we hear thrown around a lot. Um, Really, what it boils down to, the difference between the two terms before we get into them is that, you can show solidarity to someone, and it's like a sign of goodwill, right? Like, let's say the Amazon warehouse near you. So I'm in South Carolina. So the warehouse nearest me is probably the Atlanta one. Let's say that the fellas down at the Atlanta Amazon warehouse have a strike. They go on strike. They say, "Hey guys, we want better pay. We want AC in here. We're not going to work until these demands are met." So the solidarity thing for me to do is to respect their struggle, right? So I'm not going to buy from Amazon while they're striking because they would be the ones that should, right, fulfill that order. So if they're on strike and they're not the ones fulfilling that order, they're not the ones getting the things out of that warehouse to send to me, then I have to ask myself who is. And the person who is probably what we call a scab, right? It's someone who the company pays to come in and they say, "We have unruly employees, so we're just going to replace them." So if I were to buy from Amazon and they were to use a scab, um, to kind of take away that job, take away that power from that striking employee, then I'm not showing solidarity. And that scabbing employee, you also don't want to be that guy. You never want to go in nowhere where they're unionizing and you're the replacement crew. That's not good. That's not showing solidarity. That's not acting within your class, right? That's class traitor also, right? So part of solidarity is functioning within your class and helping the proletariat, right? Now there are good kinds of class traders, right? You can show solidarity with another class. If I think about it right now, um, some of my best friends that are also Marxist Leninists, they show solidarity all the time because a lot of them are much richer than me and they still listen to me, they still give me a voice, and they still like offer me a material, like a better material condition, right? Because ultimately, as Marxists, as leftists, the idea is that we believe that your material conditions affect you greatly and influence you greatly, right? They affect how you think, they affect how you act, they affect what you do. And in that, a good kind of class trader, the right kind of solidarity to show is always solidarity with the working class, always solidarity with the proletariat class. You work alongside your coworkers to unionize. That's solidarity. Or if you're petty bouge by birth, and you come from a lot of money, you redistribute that wealth. You find ways that money can benefit proletarians, that money can benefit peasants who can't work, that money can benefit other people outside of you that have less than you and improve their material conditions. Because ultimately, often our human happiness is built on those material conditions. And if the needs that we have as people are not being met, then we cannot improve ourselves. If we're not improving ourselves as people, what are we really doing? So to kind of get a working definition going of solidarity here, it is based in action, in what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and it's also based in A system I would say like tithing, right? You need to give either your time or you need to give your treasure to movements to have solidarity with them, really, right? And we'll kind of move back to the movements idea in a bit. But another way to look at something like solidarity is, it's really easy to say things, right? It's really easy to say, "Oh yeah, of course, I support the working class." You know, yeah, I came from a blue collar background. Oh yeah, I support working people. But if you're not giving money to someone that's helping working people, if you're not giving money to working people, if you're not spending time improving their conditions, then you're not actually showing solidarity with them. You're not actually helping them. You are using that to make yourself feel better. That's not helping them. That's helping you look better, feel better. That's worthless. That's a waste, honestly. Which leads us into allyship, right? So, one thing that we have to understand is just as Lenin describes in State and Revolution, and just as we may know from like a human geography class, the idea of a nation, a nationality, a group of people who are bonded by, say, a shared language, a shared ancestry, a shared tradition, a shared culture, or even just a region. These people in this nation, a nation could be, I'd argue something like the LGBTQ plus movement of today has created a sort of new nation, right? Maybe not right now, but in the future, I could see this becoming almost a nationality, almost a calling card, right? And it's important to show a form of solidarity to that called allyship, right? Where let's say you're not a member of that, right? Let's say that you're cisgendered, right? So you are the sex that was assigned to you at birth, yes, and that you're heterosexual, right? You are attracted to the opposite sex. So for you to show allyship with an LGBTQ plus person, it has to go further than just saying, "Oh, well, I'm okay with that," or "I'm okay with them getting married." That's one thing. True, that's just helping you ultimately, or helping you make friends with them, helping you kind of get feel better about yourself for, I guess, empathizing. But allyship has to take that a step further. Allyship needs to, you want to lock arms with these people. If if LGBTQ plus people in Poland are trying to get marriage rights, then as an ally, you should be supporting them fiscally and physically. You should be sending them money. You should be sending them things that they need. You should be helping them acquire whatever they need. And you should be reciting their demands when asked what they are. But you should also help them physically, right? Like, if you're getting tear gassed, a really great physical aid to that can be milk, right? We pour milk in the eyes. That helps get the tear gas out. That helps alleviate that pain. That is a good use of allyship, right? Maybe you could go in a store they couldn't go in that day. There you go. Now you're being an ally. But as an ally, you can never lead that movement, right? You don't. If we look at race relations in America, right? So when black folk are trying to improve our conditions in this country, it's important that the main speaker always be black, right? It's important that the leader of that movement always be a member of that nationality, or else there is a danger that that movement can be corrupted or co-opted, not because of any malevolence on your part, but because it takes something deeper than that human action of similarity, right? It takes something deeper than that human imitation. It takes that you need to have lived it. You need to have walked it. You need to have gone 10 miles in their moccasins, right? And so you can never lead that movement. You should not want to be a leader in that movement. You should want to be a good, humble helper, a good, humble proletarian. And part of that may be evangelizing that movement, right? Um, you know, A great help to civil rights has always been people who are in that accepted class stepping in on the behalf of the unaccepted. And I'm gonna look at the civil rights movement again, right? So in America, which is where I'm based in, we really have a settler or colonial culture, right? This land ultimately was originally owned by the natives who are from here, right? By Native Americans and by native indigenous peoples. And so when that land was taken from them, the people who came to live on it were colonizers, yes, who were there to exploit the labor that already lived there, to work and to export that wealth that they created back to the home country. But they were also what is called settlers, right? They came to settle on that quote unquote newfound land as their own new home. So they have a sort of cultural stake in that new land. It creates a sort of nation state for them, although it's not their indigenous place, you see. And so that has created over time what is considered a settler culture in America. It's created a state wherein a certain class of people exists outside of the class structure of proletarian, petit bourgeois, and bourgeois. That is to say, there's a racial structure that coexists with the class structure and operates on a similar and heavily related dependent scale. So, what I mean is, you know, to be white in America is to experience a higher level and degree of privilege than an oppressed person of color would ever feel, right? And this has a lot of other implications that I think we will get into in another episode. But my point here is that to help those colonized peoples, those indigenous peoples, and then later when they bring in the slaves, right, the literal African slave class into this country, they were colonized where they came from. They were colonized here, and even to this day in 2020, they live as an oppressed, separate, and unequal class in what is essentially what we would consider an apartheid state, right? Wherein they are the crux of the labor that is being done. They are the fulcrum around which most things that need to be done in, say, the industrialized or the agricultural workplace are being done, and yet they have no access, really, to the levers of power. They have visual access to those levers. They can be seen at the helm, but never are they given control of the ship at the base level. A member of the black petit bourgeois, a member of the black bourgeois may emerge, but the moment that he reaches that class, he has lost a large amount of that status of having been a member of the slave class. He has ascended beyond the apartheid state, and those members only are allowed to live by the state to function as an example to the other oppressed peoples there. And so, what we see is they tend to become the spokespeople of these movements. And they tend to become the leaders of these movements. And, this is something sociologists as far back as W.E.B. Du Bois have struggled with in this country, is this idea of perhaps there is a talented tenth, a quote-unquote talented tenth of people of color who could and who ethically should be lifting their fellows out of that misery and out of that poverty that they experience as part of the capitalist structure. And yet they are failing to do so because they have changed class. And this relates to allyship, and this relates to solidarity, because what you can do as a member of the petit bourgeois, as a member of the bourgeois, is you can reach out and use your privileges that are afforded to you as a white person, as someone who's not an oppressed nation, and materially give back to them and materially improve their material conditions. And you can evangelize, you can spread their message, you can spread what they need to your larger community. And that is fundamentally not just your right as an ally, but that is your duty as an informed human being on this earth, to help other nations and to lift them up. Which brings me to another example, I suppose. The IWW, the International Workers of the World, is a big tent union, right? And when I support unionization, and I do support unionization, typically I always prefer a big tent union to a trade union. Because a trade union can become reactionary over time. A trade union has more issues than a big tent union. And a big tent union is very important because it includes people from all classes. It includes people from all nations. A true big tent union doesn't discriminate. The IWW was one of the first unions to not discriminate. And a true big tent union often doesn't even really care if you're employed or not. It just wants you there, you know? And remember, right, no one has ever unionized to pay someone else money, right? You unionize to make more money for yourself. If you are in a workplace and it is not unionized, you need to ask yourself, why and how can I get it there? And a big tent union often can help a lot with organizing, as we call it, that workplace. But so the IWW they have a symbol, right? A black cat named Gumball. And Gumball's motto is that an injury to one is an injury to all. And I think about Gumball's motto a lot when I consider what allyship and what solidarity are. A good ally, someone who has solidarity with and within a movement, is someone who you see that first punch being thrown against a member of your union. You see that first punch being thrown against an oppressed person, and you want to put yourself in there, and you want to get stuck in that fight to help them and to overcome that. That's Gumball. You want to be Gumball. And so the next part of that, and what kind of one of the other topics I wanted to cover today, is the idea of isms, right? And where do isms come from? This is racism, yes. This is sexism, yes. But this is also slacktivism, this is also paternalism, and this is also corporatism. And these are things, right? These are ideological trends within our society. These are thoughts that occur and ideas that move around within our society in an almost fluid or nigh on sentient manner that are born of material conditions, right? One of the most important things I can express to you, and perhaps the single most important thing I can teach you, is the idea of the material dialectic and the dialectic of materialism. And what that is that your material conditions under which you live and under which you labor will affect you. They will affect you in the now, they will affect you in the future, and they will affect how you consider your past, which, as we know from modern psychology, over time will change how you perceive that past. And for something like racism, right? What is racism born of but ignorance? And because it is born of ignorance toward another race, toward another nationality, toward another group of people, that ism only exists because you have not been educated about them. You have not interacted with them. You have not known them in these fruitful ways because your material conditions, the way in which you live, where you live, how you live, what you live under, what system controls what you're told, hasn't given you ample opportunity to interact with them. I don't fault a racist. I don't. I don't hold them at fault up to a certain point because I don't see it rarely. Rarely is it ever to me a malevolent act. Rarely is it ever them choosing to be evil, although you can choose ignorance. It is ultimately always a facet of their material conditions, and often within that is just the structure of ignorance toward others and ignorance toward the material conditions of others. Understanding materialism will bring you a new level of empathy, and it will also bring you a new way of reading the world and and those around you, right? And for an example of this, I think of just this awful man, Jordan Peterson, right? Um, we see Jordan Peterson kind of come out of the annals or out of the darkness of modern. I think he was a psychologist, wasn't he? And modern like almost pseudo Freudian thought, right? Just almost fallacious thought that says, if you're an addict, right? According to Jordan Peterson, if you're an addict because there's something wrong with you. He would say that you're an addict because you're lazy, or because you have a corruptible spirit, or because the chaos raccoon took control of you. I'm not kidding. He said that. And someone like that doesn't have an understanding of the material dialectic. And if he does, then he is not expressing that to his audience. He is using and manipulating that language to create a system wherein things are not blamed on the individual, but are blamed on the system and the conditions around the individual. Right? I would never excuse the individual his crimes. I would never say, "Oh well, if he had not lived like this, he would not have become this way." But I would say that we should understand as a society and as a people, and anticipate as a society and as a people, how that affects them. And I would say that someone like Jordan Peterson clearly doesn't do that. But then you would ask, why do people flock to him? Well, they flock to him because of his paternalism. People like Jordan Peterson, or people like Ben Shapiro, or people like Tucker Carlson, because A, that he is attractive, B, he has a way of acting and an assumption that he forces onto people that he is intelligent, or he is more intelligent than them, that he acts like how you might imagine a smart person would, and that ultimately he is superior to them morally, ethically, and materially, right? This paternalism is based around the assumption that the boss man, that the leader, is better. And as anyone who's ever been in a workplace can tell you, this is rarely the case. Rarely is your boss or your manager figure, quote unquote, better than you are. Often, they are simply manipulative. They are simply villainously cunning. They are simply lying or conniving, right? They are not. Sorry, I have to get a drink of my water here. They are not entitled to anything better than what the rest of us have. They have simply often inherited a better starting point, a better basis in material, upon which, of course, they've grown. And I would consider this unfair and unjust at the very least, right? And so because of that assumption on our part looking at them, and from within them looking at us, see, a paternalist always looks down on you. That boss who's like, oh, well, I'm going to help you get a boat. No, if he wanted to help you get a boat, he would raise your pay Or he could just give you the boat 9 times out of 10, right? No one wants a boss who's like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna help you get that boat. Let's make a schedule for how you'll use your money, and I'll help you make sure you're doing that." That's not what you want. That's not actually helpful. That's paternalism. That is him assuming he knows better and how to spend your money, how to do what you want to do, and how to waste your time for him. Ultimately, it goes back to him. And that's dangerous. That's what we call a reactionary position. And when I say reactionary, if you're thinking of political compass, I speak from the left. A reactionary speaks from the right. I don't like the political compass. We'll get into that another time. But that's kind of that. There's your differentiation there. Noam Chomsky, vaguely on the left. He's definitely not a reactionary. Donald Trump, a reactionary, right? Different. But paternalism creates a situation known as corporatism, right? And we see corporatism a lot this month, actually, funnily enough. This is June. June is Pride Month. I quite like Pride Month. But what I don't like in Pride Month is like I don't like when Reddit makes their logo rainbow. That's corporatism. That's paternalism. These are the same. These are isms. I don't like when skate companies come out with a skateboard that's only rainbow in June and they charge me an extra $50 for the luxury of having a rainbow on the bottom of the deck. That's like pretty lame, I think. And by pretty lame, I mean they're exploiting, my nationality. They're exploiting my nation. They're exploiting my identity and arguably creating a further identity because ultimately identity is a function of class and is entrenched within the class system, which is itself a function ultimately of capital, which in our modern state means that a corporation is going to exploit your identity to you, the consumer, as much as possible. Corporatism, it often plays itself out in advertising. Amidst all these riots, companies like Reebok and Nike and Adidas and Under Armour are making these huge moves about, oh, well, we're going to black out today because we are showing quote unquote solidarity. We are showing that we are quote unquote allies with black folks around the nation, around the world. But this doesn't materially mean anything except that perhaps instead of buying a white shoe, they will sell me a black shoe. Who is still profiting here? Nike, Adidas, Reebok, Under Armour. They are still profiting. I have not had my material conditions changed by this action, which ultimately means that it was not solidarity at all. It was not allyship at all. Let's say they donate 10% of their profits this month. They say will go to helping an LGBTQ plus charity. This does not help my material conditions. This does not help the workers' material conditions. This does not help the LGBTQ plus workers' material conditions. This helps the company because this is a tax write-off for them. They are benefiting and they are exploiting my ignorance of the situation to do so. This is paternalism, this is corporatism, and this is also a new synthesis of these ideas and of others, such as racism, such as nationalism, within the modern social media landscape. This is what I call slacktivism, which is spelled slack and then you add a tivism. Slacktivism is perhaps the most dangerous movement that I see today. I would put slacktivism as being more dangerous than the modern neo-Nazi movements that we see creeping up around the globe. I would place slacktivism as more dangerous within the fascism that is endemic to the American state. I would place slacktivism as being more dangerous than the base racism with which I am treated in this country. Because slacktivism is a means by which a privileged person can exploit a nation, can exploit a nationality to help themselves in a bastardization of allyship, but also that they can manipulate the narrative around which a nationality is discussed, around which a nationality is discovered, around which a nationality is treated. And now I'm going to pause here. I'm saying nationality a lot. I don't mean that in the nation state way. Again, I mean that as in I want to improve people's material conditions, and I also want to preserve their right to live as they wish. Ultimately, your right to live as you wish is something you are entitled to a certain extent, as long as it's not a reactionary way to live. And, often these nations were created to protect an identity that is shared. They were created to protect a language that was in danger when an invader came in. They were created to protect a nomadic lifestyle that was endangered when urbanization started in a region. Nationality can be good, but your nationality can never be greater than your class interests. If you would put your nation over solidarity with your class, then you are a reactionary. You are not being kind, right? Solidarity must first go to your class. Well, really, it should first go to the proletariat class, to the proletarians. That's something to consider here. But going back, so slacktivism would manipulate the language around which a nationality is treated. And slacktivism ultimately often worsens that condition, because what slacktivism ultimately does is it allows a class in society known as liberals, who are people ultimately disaffected by the political system. Often they are petty bourgeois, at least on a world scale. It allows them to write off, as they are oft to do. It allows them to write off the material conditions under which oppressed peoples, under which other nations live, in exchange for comfort at thinking that they have done something favorable or profitable to those people. That's slacktivism. That's what that ultimately does. And that's unfair to them, I would say, right? I would say that is unfair to the nation that is being written off. And it's unfair to the liberal, ultimately, who is often simply a disaffected person. It is simply someone whose material conditions have not aligned in such a way to grant them a higher level of empathy, to grant them an awareness of the material conditions around them, and to grant them an awareness for the pain and suffering that others experience. In modern America, the liberal is anyone for whom civility and orderly conduct are more important than, and more important to protect than it would be to protect an oppressed nation, or it would be to help an oppressed nation, ultimately. And what that plays out as in our state, right, is that often the liberal is the vote blue no matter who. It's the Democrat. And I'm just going to go on out and say, both of these parties want the same thing. Both of these parties are inherently liberal. And due to how liberalism functions, due to its conservation of civility, conservation of order, conservation of the existing systems for the sake of capital, for the sake of continuing to accrue wealth, for the sake of peace, for the sake of friendship, for the sake of insert here, over improving material conditions drastically or radically, because that would endanger that capital, that would endanger that wealth, that would endanger that friendship. Liberalism is naturally a ratchet toward the reactionary. And by a ratchet, I mean the mechanism and tooling, right? You have a gear upon which all the knobs are turned to the left. And you have a mechanism over it which catches the gear. It has a lip. And as that gear is to turn, the lip catches on the edge. Once it passes it, going to the right. The gear must turn right here. And as that gear turns right, that ratchet clamps onto that lip, so the lip cannot jerk back left. Over time, this shifts the cultural, the political, the socioeconomic movements within a state, within a region, within a group. Liberalism, over time, shifts what is called the Overton window, which is the amount of political efficacy, the amount of political change available to the people, further to the right, further toward the reactionary. And in doing so, liberalism endangers ultimately not only civility, but also, the material dialectic. In history, liberalism leads to Red Scares. And Red Scares are a thing that you should be terrified of. Red Scares end with people like me in prison. They end with workers in far worse conditions than they were in before due to a death of unions and unionization. Red Scares lead to war, and war is a terrible bourgeois construction that only kills us, the proletarian. Liberalism is a special kind of scourge, and liberalism is an ism. And that should be all you need to know about that. Slacktivism also leads to passivity. Yes. It leads to a movement being co-opted by capital, which leaves it functionally and fundamentally dead to the nation that started it. Slacktivism actively wastes time, which is an important facet of both solidarity and allyship. And in wasting time, it removes real conversation, it removes real motives from the argument, and it removes morality, ethics, and care. Ultimately, as a Marxist, I care that you care. And I'm going to get in trouble with other Marxists, I suppose, for having said that. Some of my friends online will scold me. I invite that. Please dialogue with me. Feel free to email me at coolzonepod@gmail.com. Whatever questions, concerns, ideas you have, I'm interested. I want to hear them. I want this to be a dialogue, and I'm talking to people to interview them and to bring them on. Let's make this a working group, right? A talk. And really, the thing about these isms is that there are good ones, right? Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, syndicalism to a certain extent, Luxemburgism. We'll cover each of these in more depth when its time comes. But what you need to know is, as a Marxist, I may come off as paternalistic from time to time. But this is part of it is, yes, my inherent, unfortunate endemic paternalism due to my place in society. But I'm working past that. Part of it comes from this idea within Leninism, which I am a proponent of, that we must create a unified party, or in my case, possibly a union, which can lead the proletariat from the back, which can wait and help agitate for a revolution, and when that revolution comes, can help guide the proletariat toward the ultimate success of the proletarian, toward a better world, a socialist world, one where the working class can be helped, where the working class can succeed uniquely, and where material conditions can be bettered for us all to reduce crime, to reduce poverty, to annihilate poverty, to annihilate crime, to help all. Don't be Scabby the rat. See, I've talked about Gumball, the black cat. Scabby is a rat that we put outside when a place is unionizing to tell people that if they are scabs, they will probably get shot, probably get beat up, probably die. Because they are destroying these people's livelihood. They're destroying the material conditions which these workers have labored for unfairly. Don't be Scabby. Be Gumball. Which leads us out of liberalism to another ism, progressivism. Progressives would seem to the liberal, as I was for so long, a good thing. I'm going to take a sip of my water now. Progressives would seem to be good. They would seemingly improve the system enough that the worker who was a minority, who was a member of an oppressed nation, could have a better time, right? Seemingly. They would do this by working within the current existing system, which is good for liberals and good for liberalism. Why? Because it preserves peace, it preserves quietness, it preserves that unity that liberals feel within the system. Typically is disaffected peoples. And progressivism would do all of this, seemingly, just from the goodness of its heart. However, progressives and progressivism is ultimately quite dangerous. And it is dangerous ultimately because it aids the capitalist system. And they do that because, in a weird way, the best thing that can happen to this country, America, to the capitalist states around the world, is for material conditions for workers to kind of get worse for a bit. And I say that because there is a threshold at which the capitalist will always drive you. The capitalist will inherently always drive you to labor under a system which exploits you the most it possibly can for the least possible reward to you. And what that means is his goal is to pay you the least he can for you to show up to work every day and make him a whole lot of money. For the revolution to happen, you either have to realize that en masse, which doesn't happen, or that has to reach such a low threshold that you can no longer live on it. And the progressive ultimately continues beyond its natural lifespan, capitalism. Because from a Marxist perspective, capitalism lives for a little bit in between feudalism and socialism. It's just another phase in human progress. It's a necessary phase to a certain extent, because there's a period in time in which capitalism can be more efficient than socialism. But socialism is ultimately far more efficient. Far better way to create capital is actually socialism, really. I'm not kidding. It creates more capital and redistributes it more evenly, meaning more people can expand to go create things. So because of progressivism, that ratchet, that liberal ratchet we mentioned earlier, it doesn't accentuate the ridges, right? It doesn't make it harder to go back. Progressivism actually makes the system spin faster toward the right. And it does this because when you have the Marxist approach to nationality, when you have solidarity, the nations within a state can naturally compete in a productive way, because competition ultimately isn't really all that necessary. They can work together in a very productive way to create something better. But within the capitalist system, with progressives, you may have, and we have here in America today, an artificial bettering of one nation over another. And what does this look like? This looks like, affirmative action. I quite like affirmative action. I think it is important to have quotas of nationalities and of nation groups within institutions, within a state, to ensure representation, yes, but also to ensure that different nations are getting the same opportunities. Because to me, the most important thing of all, because of the material dialectic, is that everyone receive fair and equal opportunities so that you can really compete properly on your own merits, so that you can really work against one another and with one another only on the basis of your merits, not on how much capital your grandfather accrued when he ran an emerald mine in in apartheid South Africa. And that's a kind of a dig at Elon Musk. And so progressives prevent that. They help it to a certain extent, right? Affirmative action helps that, kind of, but also makes it worse, because often, as I know from personal experience, to get into a bourgeois institution, to get into a university of higher learning, to get into a good university, or a so-called good university, because I don't really think those exist, takes a certain kind of person. Often that ultimately helps petty bourgeois and bourgeois within those nation groups, who, as we've noted earlier, aren't really the same kind of member anymore, because they're now a traitor to their original class, having ascended up into another class. They are stealing, ultimately, something that should have been given to someone else. And that's pretty rough. Progressives gave us Obama. Obama was ultimately a war criminal. His mother worked for the CIA. His father was part of a far-right coup in Kenya. His father and his mother were global bourgeois, certainly bourgeois within the Kenyan state. I would consider them class traitors toward black people. And I would consider him the ultimate class traitor because, as I mentioned before, in a performative sense, he could be seen at the helm. He was there to give people like me someone to look up to. But in an actual sense, in an actuative sense, he didn't do anything for me. He didn't give me anything. And that's really unfortunate for me, honestly. It just is. Which leads us to electoralism in general, right? And how progressives play out in that space, because that is a necessary part of capitalism that I would like to do away with. Leads me to the Bernie Sanders movement, beyond the campaign. Bernie is a democratic socialist. I don't like democratic socialism. It is progressivism with a better title. It works from within the system to theoretically aid those oppressed under it by working from within. It cannot ever succeed. No state has ever gone left, has ever fixed itself under democratic socialism. No one. No state ever. Democratic socialism unnaturally exacerbates that pre-existing capital state. Sorry. And as it unnaturally exacerbates and unnaturally continues those, right, it can lead to a situation like what we have now in modern America, where both parties, even the Democratic Socialists, parties want the same things, ultimately, but with different names. Both parties have reduced activity. They have mass inactivity. No one votes anymore in America, I'll note. Probably because they don't count the votes, if you ask someone like me. But it could also be because, ultimately, you feel disaffected. You feel the system has left you behind. You feel the system hasn't helped you. And this materially means that because you're not being helped by the system, you don't like the system. And because you don't like the system, you don't participate in the system. And because you don't participate, the system doesn't help you, which is a self-fulfilling cycle. So Bernie was the compromise for people like me. We wanted to give it one last, hoorah at electoralism before we got, that was my first election. It'll probably be my last election, if I'm being honest. I'll vote for socialists. I'll vote for democratic socialists if they come up. But never again with the same vigor. Unless they are a real socialist, unless they're a Marxist. Which leads me to the next point. What is leftism? What is socialism? What is communism? What am I talking about with all this? What's the point? The goal of a leftist, of a true leftist, and how you can distinguish if someone is a leftist or not, is whether or not they want to establish a global dictatorship of the proletariat. And that sounds like a bunch of stupid words, and it is a bunch of stupid words. What that means is, do they want for the world to be ruled by the working class? All working within their own little communes, within their own Soviets, within their own spaces, to produce the products they want to produce at the highest possible level, to trade amongst one another so that all the world can succeed equally, so that we can lift everyone up out of poverty. So that once everyone is out of poverty, everyone can advance into that great green tomorrow as one. Which can be done. We've seen done. Does that person who says they are a leftist want to improve the material conditions of the worker in every aspect? They want to educate the worker on his rights. Do they give time to the worker to improve his condition? Do they give money to the worker to improve his condition? Are they a worker? Ultimately, a good leftist is a worker. While yes, many of the leaders of our movement over time, Lenin, the theoretical future Black Lenin, Engels, Marx's the man who funded Marx largely. Mao was a class trader. Nelson Mandela was a class trader. Mahatma Gandhi was a class trader. To a certain extent, Cornel West is a class trader. And I do consider him a Marxist. A leftist at the very least. These are people who will improve the conditions of the worker. A leftist will unify and will unionize wherever he goes. If he is not telling all the nations that they are valid and yet equal, if he is not unionizing the workplace, if he is not bringing the workplace, the study hall, the classroom, if he is not bringing the taxi drivers together to a union, to one union that can protect all the workers, he's not a leftist. He's fake. He is aestheticized. He's doing it only to be seen. An issue within leftist spaces is this idea of unity. And this will be the last thing I think I'll touch on today. There will never be unity on the left. The right, the reactionary space, is naturally cannibalizing. And what I mean by that is they lack a certain air of logic and a certain reasoning of their points. Conservatism is ultimately a contradictory statement and a contradictory ideology born of capital and born of capitalism. That is unnatural. That is not from man's own natural belief, but is from a grifter class who spreads it amongst the poor to convince them to do what he says so that he and his buddies, he and his cronies can benefit. The right, the reactionaries, are self-cannibalizing because their ideology is built around reacting to things that are given to them and trying to assume that they're better, trying to assume something is better, trying to assume that the old was better. The reactionary would never advance beyond primitivism if it were not for the leftist, if it were not for the natural socialist within us all. If it were not for human empathy, the reactionary would still live in the Levant, the Fertile Crescent, and would still be a caveman. This is not a dig against the people who live there now. I quite like the people who live there. But I would like to point out that the Fertile Crescent is no longer quite so fertile, and it has become sand with oil under it. And it became sand with oil under it in part because the conservative could not advance his lifestyle to support the trees and grasses that lived there at one time and chopped them down, which led to desertification, which destroyed the land. This happens time and again because the reactionary, the conservative, the liberal, doesn't understand that the world has to advance. Leftists, on the other hand, understand that the world must advance, and yet, because we are ultimately scientists, some of us, the Marxists, anti-scientists, some of us, the anarcho-communists, I would say, anti-ideologues, some of us, the anarchists, I would say, we have opposing viewpoints on what is to be done. What is to be done about the national question? What is to be done about the state or lack thereof in the future? What is to be done to uplift the global proletariat into that green future and green tomorrow? Because we all argue on this, we have all entrenched our positions. As the Marxist, I see myself as a scientist. I will not be told that there is another way to do my science. This is tried and true and tested. Would a biologist want a geologist colleague to come over to him and say, no, you're analyzing these cell structures all wrong. You need to do this. You need to recollect these samples. These samples are all bad because I don't see any of the mineral deposits I'm used to seeing here, which means that you're wrong. No. And similarly, the biologist would not go to the geologist and tell him, hey, you just took a core sample. This is a terrible made core sample. Look at this. There's no detritus here. There's no dead things. There's no cells. What am I to study? This is worthless. Throw this out. This is bad science. This is fake junk science. Both men are equally useful. Very necessary in their time. But in his workplace, the biologist is always right about biology if he follows the proper systems therein to discover the truth. The geologist is always right about geology in his time when he follows the proper systems to get there. As a Marxist, I will always be right on the money, at least now, at least while the material conditions and while the dialectic and while the science says so, I am right on what I'm right about, on what Marxists know. The anarchist, in his way, sees himself as right. The anarcho-communist, in his way, sees himself as right. But I will never unify with them. I will never, for so long as I seek revolution, cede the power, C-E-D-E, the power of that revolution over to them. During the revolution, anarchists, anarcho-communists, for the Marxist-Leninist point of view, will be labeled reactionaries. Would I protect them at a riot? Yes. Would I invite their aid? Yes. But I would do so while educating them on my way, on the right way. Not because they are wrong in their time, but because from my perspective, in my time, I am right. Unitarily and unilaterally right. That's just how it is. That's the function. That's what I have this theory for. That's what I read these things for. This sounds very egotistical, but this is the nature of a logic-based science. It is the opposite of cannibalizing. It fractures over time. Often due to reactionary elements within. Often because one group was more reactionary than another group. And there can be no space for opposition in the revolution. There just will not be. There won't be. There cannot be. It's not allowed. In podcast news, I'm looking for an audio editor. If anyone has a program that works for them that's cheap, ideally free, or you can bootleg it, I suppose, that you can tell me about, I'm open to it. I kind of need it. That would help me get an intro. That would help me get music going, background music. Similarly, the graphics are probably illegal. I don't actually know. I have no clue. But I would appreciate better graphics. Maybe I have an idea or two for a logo. And kind of try and stylize this a bit more. Edit my volume, of course. Edit my sound. Chop this up so I don't have to record it all in 1 hour long take. That would all be nice. I would need an editing software to do that. So if anyone has any recommendations, hit me up, email me, whatever. And hey, this is the cool zone.